This is part 4 of my Frigate NVR series. We're going to talk about displaying live video feeds from your cameras using WebRTC, and we're also going to talk about the Frigate card that's designed to work directly with Frigate. And at the end, we'll talk about my thoughts on Blue Iris versus the Frigate NVR, and whether or not I recommend one over the other. So stay tuned and let's get started. In order to use WebRTC to display live feeds from your cameras, you're going to need to install a component. And there is a component here called the WebRTC component. And what this component does, it allows you to view IP cameras using their RTSP streams in real time. And it uses the WebRTC protocol and also the MSC technology. WebRTC is used internally on your network, and sometimes you can't create a WebRTC communication stream outside of your network. So it defaults back to or reverts back to MSE. And so you can use this both internally and externally from your network, which makes it really nice. So let's go over a couple of things that it talks about here. Why use WebRTC in the beginning or in the first place? It works with any modern browser, even on mobiles. It's the only browser technology with minimal camera stream delay, so half a second or below, and I've verified that. Some of the Frigate or some of the Home Assistant camera entity or picture entity cards are 10, 15 seconds, and I've heard some people say minutes delayed. When I want to watch live stream from my cameras through Home Assistant, I just use this this card right here, this WebRTC component, and it's real time. Works well with an unstable channel, does not use transcoding, it doesn't load the CPU. So it goes straight from your RTSP stream on your camera over to your card and just displays it there. And it can support camera streams with sound. So WebRTC is a way to display your cameras in live, almost live fashion with less than a half a second delay in most cases, directly in your browser. So in order to use this, you actually have to install the WebRTC component, and you can do that in Home Assistant using HACS. I recommend using HACS for all of your external application installs. You have to be on a supported version of Home Assistant to use it, but it makes installing these custom components so much easier. So let me take you through installing this using HACS, and on that I'll show you my development or my test Raspberry Pi, and we'll go over to HACS. It's super simple. Go to integrations, and it's super simple. What we'll do is we'll just go over here to the Explore and Add Repositories button, click on that, and then we'll just search for WebRTC. You can see I've started typing it here, and we'll just click on that. And then you can read through all this information right here. And if you agree with what it says or you don't see any issues with it, go ahead and install it. And you can either use the beta version or you can use the stable version. I'm going to use stable version 2.1.1, and we'll install it. And now what it'll do is you'll go down here to the bottom and you'll see that it says you probably need to restart your Home Assistant instance in order for it to work. So here we go. It says pending restart. So we'll go over to our configuration and our server controls, and always check your configuration before you restart. And if it's valid, then go ahead and restart it. And this is going to go ahead and install the WebRTC integration that you just built. Now, a note about this is that you will have to install WebRTC anyway in order to use the Frigate card, which I'll show later in the video. The Frigate card is a card that was designed to be used with the Frigate NVR. You can stream either from directly from Frigate or you can use WebRTC, but you can't use WebRTC unless you have actually installed it. So you can see here that it's all up and running again. Now, if we go over to configuration, integrations, and we add an integration here, we can also look for WebRTC as well. And you'll see here that it's installing it. Now it's created the configuration for WebRTC. Now there's nothing here to configure unless you need to do some testing or you need to do something outside of what is normal. And when you do that, you click configure. And the only thing you can really set here is the minimum and maximum UDP ports. So if you have a need to set up UDP ports, let's say you're forwarding this through a firewall or something, and you need a range of ports, then you would set those up here. I didn't have to do any of that at all. I just left it as it was. Now we have WebRTC set up and the integration configured. So how do we use this card, or how do we use it? So let me show you how we create a couple of cameras to view with the WebRTC card. So I've got a blank dashboard here with a blank view, and I'm just going to add a card. Now there's no WebRTC card, so you need to specify a card that you can you can do the code manually, and that's what's called a manual card. So we're going to add a manual card here. We've got to give it a type, and we've got to give it some other information. Now looking on the site here, you can see that the minimal configuration for that card is type custom WebRTC camera. So we'll just go ahead and put that as the type of the card. And we have to specify what our entity, our URL is going to be. Now you can do a URL here of your RTSP stream. Now remember, we're doing RTSP streams with WebRTC. You can either do it this way, or if you've configured camera entities, like I've shown you in my other videos for this series, you can use the entity name. That allows you to keep a central location for all your camera configurations and just use the entity type to display them in the card. So I'm going to go ahead and use the entity name in this case. So my entity for the camera is, in this case, the driveway camera. So we have custom WebRTC camera and entity driveway. Now there's some other things you can put on here to make it a little more customized. For example, you can give it a title. I don't do that because when I'm looking at the cameras, I know where it is. A poster or a splash stream or splash screen, that just gives you a still image to show while the camera itself is loading up. You have an intersection, which means it's auto pause the stream when less than X% of video element is in the screen. It's 50% by default. You can also set the sound to be disabled or muted by default. If you want to unmute it, then you would just change this to false. It's defaulted to true, so it is muted. If you want to hear sound on your cameras, you gotta set this to true, or to false. I'm sorry. And then you can do custom video controls. Default is false, and then the background. If you have a PTZ camera, you can set up PTC stuff in here as well. And then you can disable MSE or WebRTC. If you only want WebRTC ever to play, you would disable MSE here. If we're using pan, tilt, and zoom configurations, here's how you would set that up here. You would have a PTZ control, opacity. So you would have the opacity of the controls on the camera screen. Your service would be the PTZ service for your camera, and then the data that you send to it. Now this is for a Sonoff camera. You have a whole bunch of different kinds of cameras here. But I'm not going to dig into that on this video. If you have a PTZ camera, you'll have to do some experimentation. So right now you can see that we have a single camera set up here. So let's go ahead and save it. And now this camera is displayed on this dashboard just like this. And it's in real time. You can see here, if I don't hover over it, you can see that the clock is ticking up and it's just going in real time. Now there's some other information here that you can look at that tells you what the icons mean. And by the way, there's a bunch of known working cameras here you can set up with different URLs to get to the RTSP streams. There's some discussion about WebRTC external access, and I'll link this down below in the comments. It's just the GitHub site for the WebRTC card. And then these status icons, which you really can't see very well. But if you look at this particular thing now, you can see that I have looks like a little, well, it's just changed. It's now got the little flowerish looking square thing, which is, I guess, the WebRTC symbol. What that tells me, and it's this symbol right here, which you can't really see on the video, stream is being played with WebRTC. If your stream is being played with MSE, or starting connection with MSE, there is a icon there, which is hard to see. I can't even see it on this. Yep, no way to see that. Stream is played with MSE, which is what it starts out with. And then you've got these starting connections, connecting, remote, loading video. So if you're trying to troubleshoot this and it's doing something and it's spinning and you want to know what is happening, check some of these icons here. And these icons are displayed again up in this top right corner. The other thing to consider is this is playing an RTSP stream directly from your camera. So if you are concerned about bandwidth or something else, make sure that you take into consideration what you're doing when you're displaying this, let's say in a remote location. You're uploading the bandwidth from your connection and then downloading it to wherever you're at. So keep that in mind. This is a single card. Now I'm going to add a second WebRTC card because I want to show you kind of how I do things. Now you'll notice here I have a title called Front Cams, and I have two cameras in the front, and I want to be able to display those cameras by themselves in the front. And then I have two cameras in the back. I want to be able to display those cameras by themselves. And then I have what I call the front three, which is the garage plus the two front. Whatever combination you want to set up, you can put all 5 of the cameras or however many you have on a single screen. Just consider the bandwidth pull whenever you do that, if you need to see all 5 of them or whatever it is. If you have 10 or 15 cameras, I don't know how well that's going to work with this setup. You're just going to have to experiment and see if you have issues. Number one, if you're doing 15 cameras with RTSP streams, your network has to handle 15 RTSP streams. You can use the substream or the mainstream when you're displaying this. I want to display the mainstream because I want the full resolution of the camera when I'm looking at it in this this method or with this method. All right, let me add that second card here. It's exactly the same as we did before. It's going to be a manual card. And we're going to call this type is, again, WebRTC or custom. So custom WebRTC camera, and then our entity is going to be camera front port, if I get this right. Now these camera entities have to be the same name as what you have in your frigate.yml. And we'll let this set up. You'll notice here the icon, it's doing the same thing that we talked about a moment ago. And if we look at the icons, that particular icon means that it is connecting to remote using WebRTC, if I'm reading that right, or starting web, one of these two. Let's see if it's done it by now. I'm just going to save it so it'll try to load that camera up. And here we have 2 cards side by side. Now, if you want to be able to display these cards in what we call the panel mode, which is a single card, you're going to have to build a grid of cards. And I use the grid cards to do that. And let me show you how I've done that in my other example here. So let's get out of this and we'll go over to my live camera view. So first of all, let's take a look at the difference. Here are the 2 cameras. And I suppose you could just kind of blow them up by increasing the size of the browser by, doing the zoom on your browser. So I'm at 125%. If I go back to 100% here, then it brings these back down to normal. Actually, it messes them up. But if you want to put both of these cards kind of in a panel view side by side, let me show you how I did that with my production cameras. I have a camera here, and you'll see what I talked about a minute ago. I have front 3. So I have 3 cameras here, and then I have back, and I have my back cameras. So my front 2 cameras, in order to display these in a panel, where you can see here that I have it in panel mode, it only allows a single card in panel mode. But if I go into the configuration, you'll see that, in fact, let's go down here to edit. You'll see that I've done this in a grid card format. So I have 1 grid card, and in that grid card, I have 2 different camera cards. And that allows me to put this in a grid format or in a panel view format with both cards kind of side by side on the display. And that's kind of what I was going for here. I want those 2 cameras to be side by side, not one on top of the other. I have a whole video on grid cards and how to set that up. You can play around with this and make this look however you want to based on how your dashboards are set up or whatever your needs are. I just happen to like it this way so that I can see these cards full size, as big as they will be on the screen, and then in kind of the panel view mode. Okay, so that's WebRTC. So let's talk about the Frigate card. Now the Frigate card is a card that's designed to work with Frigate. It has some controls on it that allow it to pull up clips and things like that, and snapshots and everything else. And let's just give you a sample of what it looks like. Here is a picture of the Frigate card. It's got a button here for the menu. You can look at, I think these are clips. Or no, this is live view. You can look at clips, you can look at snapshots, and you can go directly to the URL where your Frigate stuff is in Home Assistant, and it'll just pull up the single camera on the Frigate NVR display itself. Now this is a Frigate Loveless card. For live viewing, clips and snapshots via a mini gallery, automatic updating to continually show the latest clip or snapshot, support for filtering events by zone and label, arbitrary entity access via menu, so motion sensor access, full loveless editing, theme friendly, and support for WebRTC. You must install the WebRTC like we talked about a moment ago. Just like we did with the other stuff, you're going to install this via the HACS system, and it's going to be a front end rather than an integration because it's just a card. It's not an actual integration. So I've already got that installed. What I'm going to take you through here is how I actually set up a Frigate card. So let's go over into my Home Assistant setup and let's build a Frigate card or add a Frigate card. And for that, I've got a little section already set up for us to use here. We're going to go ahead and edit the dashboard. And we are going to add a card up here. Now this card, if you installed it right and you've done everything correctly, restarted if you had to or whatever, you'll be able to type in Frigate card and you'll see custom Frigate card. This is available directly from the UI. And we're going to go through and we're going to go ahead and set up the configuration for this card. And our camera entity is going to be one of our cameras. Now this is a place where it's required that you set up the cameras beforehand and you have all the entities set up. You can't go in and specify a URL for this portion of the card. You can set up a URL if you're using the WebRTC. I'll show you here in just a minute. So again, we're going to pick the front camera, the driveway camera here. And you need a Frigate URL. Now this is where it gets a little bit crazy. If you're planning on accessing your clips and your snapshots and things like that, you need a valid URL. And it's easy to specify your Home Assistant instance if you are using a local IP address and you're not using SSL on your local IP address, because you can't mix and match SSL and non-SSL. That's the HTTPS stuff. What you have to do if you're using SSL and it's different than your certificate's different than what you're trying to put in your Frigate URL, you're going to have to use a reverse proxy. This gets a little bit complicated and a little bit crazy when you're trying to do this stuff. I'm going to skip over the part about the reverse proxy. I do have a video on doing reverse proxies. Look up my Nginx reverse proxy stuff. On my reverse proxy, all I did was specify the Frigate URL port 5000, which is where Frigate sits on the Home Assistant server. Now, if you're running Frigate somewhere else in your network, you just point it to that and you figure this out that way. But you have to have the Frigate URL in here or it won't work. So in my case, I set up a dummy domain that's only accessible internally. And this is the URL that goes to my reverse proxy. And then my reverse proxy takes this and sends it to my Frigate server on port 5000. Now, the reason, again, I had to do that is I have a DNS or a HTTPS or SSL enabled domain for Home Assistant. I also have to have an SSL enabled domain for this Frigate URL. And since it's a required field, you have to have it in here. I know that gets confusing. I will help you in Discord or in your comments if you have questions about this, but I'm not going to go into the full details of the reverse proxy on this video. All right, so we'll go to optional settings now. If you want to have the motion stuff set up here, you can pick one of your sensors from the camera. Now remember, if you set up person detection on your cameras, you're going to have an entity for every one of those detections. So in this case, for the driveway camera, if I look at driveway here, I've got a cat motion, dog motion, person motion, and then my zones, I can also use those, but we won't. I'm going to say I only want to be notified if there's a person here for my motion sensor. The Frigate camera name is important. If you want to have this, when you click the camera icon or the globe icon, it takes you to the camera settings within, or the camera page in the Frigate NVR. Default view is up to you. You can either start with a live view, a clip gallery, which you can see here. Those are the clips. So if I were to click on any of these, it would play the clip. Then you have a snapshot gallery. These are all the snapshots. And then you have latest clip or latest snapshot. So I'm going to just start with live view for today. Menu mode is hidden overlay above or below. So if we click any of these, first of all, it's already hidden. You can see here there's no menu here. If we do overlay, it puts all the menu icons up here over top of the image. Now I don't like that because it takes up too much of the image. There's stuff back here that I want to see, but the menu is in the way. You can go with an above, which then takes up some real estate, but it leaves the full image available. You can go below, same thing. It takes up real estate on your dashboard or whatever page, but it gives you the full image without the menu. Or you can go back to what's called hidden. And then the only time the menu shows up is if you click it. I think that's the best of both worlds. I'm going to leave it that way. The view timeout in seconds is how long it'll play when you have an alert or whatever. I have this set to about 30 seconds because most of my clips are in the 30-second range. And then under advanced, we have a couple of things that I'm not going to use today, but you can have a zone filter and you can have an object filter. So if you created zones in your configuration, you can use a frigate zone in order to filter out what happens with this camera view. And you can even filter that down to a type of object. So you can have close in and person. So only people close in or persons close in will trigger this camera. And then here is the WebRTC parameters. These are optional. Again, you must have WebRTC installed, like I showed you before, in order to use this. So if we click on WebRTC, and again, you can use Frigate if you want to, but if we click on WebRTC, then you need the web or the camera entity to use. I don't know if you can specify the URL here, but we again need to specify the camera that we're going to be displaying when we click on the WebRTC stuff. And then we'll save this. And you'll see here that we have this full screen image on this page. Now, if I go up here and I change this to, and it's because we're in panel mode, if we change this to masonry mode, the default, we'll have the mini image here. And this is what I talked about before. If you want to use grid cards, you need to use the grid cards to make a single image or a single card that has multiple cameras in it or frigate cards in it. Then you can kind of display those all together. So if I save this or get out of edit mode now, what we'll see is we have the menu where we can go to live mode, which is what we default to. We can go to our clips mode here. And for that, we can click on any of the clips and we can auto play these clips or play these clips. Then we can go back over here to snapshot mode and we can look at any of the snapshots. And you can go to this world and it will take you directly to the camera within the Frigate NVR. And it pops it out in a new tab so you don't have to go back. And then, of course, we can always go back to live view. I find this very, very handy. And the reason why is if I have a whole bunch of these cards on here, all my cameras, and I want to take a quick glance at what's going on in terms of the clips or the snapshots, then what I have is I have just a whole listing of these snapshots, and you can actually scroll down through all of these snapshots and you can pick out any one of these things that you want to view and you can view these snapshots. Let's see where I'm at. Let's see, here's one of me here talking to the neighbor. So I can go back in my history and just in this Frigate card, I can go back and I can look at all of the clips here. And man, this is super handy. That doesn't mean that means I don't have to go to the media browser. That means I don't have to go back to events or whatever else. I can go directly from this camera. And that makes the Frigate card really, really nice. The only thing that makes this complicated is the need for the reverse proxy if that's what you're going to do. So now you can take all of this information and just for the fun of it, let's add a second Frigate card. Just how we did it before, we'll add another card. And again, we'll call it Frigate. And again, we have to do all of this stuff. So this is going to be the front porch one. So let me find the F down here, front porch. And the Frigate URL again is my test URL. And again, that's reverse proxied over to my Frigate NVR on port 5000 because you need that on port 5000. Now, if you don't get a camera display up here, you need to make sure you have the correct camera displayed. I think this might be the right one here. Yep, that's the right one. And then under optional, again, we'll do the same thing. We'll do camera, binary sensor, front porch. And I'll do person motion. Frigate camera name front, FRONTPRCH is the actual camera name. Default view will be live. Menu mode will be hidden as it is now. View timeout 30 seconds. For my advanced, we'll leave that alone. And then my WebRTC, same thing. We'll use WebRTC for live. And then we'll come down here and we'll find front porch person. Oops, that's back porch. Let's go to front porch person. Now, if you specify the wrong one, it's either not going to work or it's going to show you the wrong camera. Okay, it's important that this Frigate camera name, it says optional here, but if you want to look at your clips or if you want to look at your snapshots, you need to make sure that this is correct because this is how it determines where to get your clips from. It's also important that it's correct when you click this button to take you to the camera directly in the NVR. So you got to make sure that you have that correct as well. And so if we close out of the editor, we have two cameras here. Let me refresh the screen. Two cameras, each with the ability to show clips and snapshots. You can also look at motion detection here. Now, I don't find this very useful by clicking here. It gives me a timeline of motion, but that doesn't really mean anything to me specifically. So anyway, it makes it very handy for you to be able to pull through and look at all these clips and all of these snapshots if you're recording both of those for each of your cameras. And then, of course, the live view, so you can just kind of watch things in real time. So there you have the Frigate card and the WebRTC card. Both of those are ways for you to display the live camera feeds, as well as manipulate or change or work with the clips and the recordings that you have for the cameras directly in Home Assistant on the UI. And you can put these in your dashboards, you can put these on your tablets or whatever else you want to do. So it makes it really nice and really handy to work with the cameras. So having used Blue Iris for a few years and then moving over to Frigate, let's talk about a few of the high points that I feel, to me, are important and whether or not they work in either one of the systems. So the first thing is real-time viewing. That is available in Blue Iris, and by what I'm showing you here is actually available in Frigate as well. It's native in Blue Iris, so it's easier to set up in Blue Iris than it is in Frigate, but you can do it. Multiple OS capability. Blue Iris only runs on Windows, so no. Frigate will run on multiple of operating systems since it is a Docker container, and it is an add-on to Home Assistant, which is even a better plus. Object detection, yes, for Blue Iris. Yes, for Frigate. However, Blue Iris requires an external program, either a cloud-based service or something like DeepStack to be installed. Facial recognition, Blue Iris with an external, like something like DeepStack, will do that. But Frigate will do person detection, but doesn't actually do facial recognition as of this recording. It's still being worked on, so we'll see if that comes out. Can you get up and running quickly? Blue Iris has a lot of buttons and a lot of switches and a lot of stuff. So it takes a little bit of learning to get Blue Iris up and running. Frigate for me was out of the box up and running in about 10 minutes. There's some learning there, but it seems to be easier because there's less stuff to mess with in Frigate than there is in Blue Iris. 24/7 recording is available both in Blue Iris and in Frigate. External storage, yes for Blue Iris, not so much for Frigate on Home Assistant. In Blue Iris, you can mount your shares and record directly to the shares via your normal Windows shares. In Frigate on Home Assistant, it records to the media folder, but the media folder is not exposed to the point where it's available to your external storage like a NAS. So that's an issue, especially if you're recording on a Raspberry Pi. Now I use what's called DataCTL to move all of my heavy-duty Home Assistant directories and stuff that are being written to my external USB drive. And if you're booting off a USB drive in Home Assistant, then you have the ability to have more storage. So that may or may not be an issue for you. Overall, I like them both. I like Blue Iris for it being an NVR. It does what it's supposed to all the time. I like Frigate because it does what it's supposed to. I've had very little issues with Frigate, if any at all, as a matter of fact. Blue Iris requires me to run up my super heavy, hot powered server all the time. Frigate runs on my Home Assistant Blue that's been running everything else, so it's lower power consumption, lower heat generation. So that's a definite plus in the power category. Would I recommend either over the other? Not really. Blue Iris just does what it's supposed to, and it's been great for $50 a year. That thing runs all the time, great, does everything it's supposed to. Frigate is free, open source. You have the ability to do most of what you do with Blue Iris, so it's really down to preference, whichever one you think is best for your use case. So I enjoy them both. And that's part 4 of my 4-part series for Frigate. Now, let me just preface this by saying 0.9 release candidate is being worked on, and that's going to change the configuration options and a whole bunch of things in the way the recordings and the clips and things are stored within Frigate. So we'll stay tuned for that. I'll make a video on that when it's out and ready to go. But it will be some configuration changes, and it will be a difference in the way this stuff is stored on your storage medium and the way clips are pulled and recordings are done, etc., etc. I hope you enjoyed this 4-part series. Let me know if you have any other questions or comments. Put those down below. I'm available on Discord. If you're not a channel subscriber, please subscribe to the channel. Helps support this as I go along. And we will see you on the next video. Cheers.